Hello friends, I welcome you to tonight's bedtime stories for grown-ups. If you enjoy these readings, I would encourage you to press that like button and subscribe so you will be notified of upcoming bedtime stories. I thank you for your support. So, before we begin, it is time to unwind. Find yourself a comfortable place where you can relax. Once you have settled into that place, take a deep breath. You can feel the tension leaving your body as you exhale. Your day has come to an end. There's nothing left for you to do now but listen to these stories and drift to sleep. So, let us begin. A patent medicine testimonial. You might as well try to move the rock of Gibraltar as attempt to change Uncle Abimelech's mind when it is once made up, said Mary gloomily. Mary is like dear old Dad. He gets discouraged rather easily. Now, I'm not like that. I'm more like Mother's folks, as Uncle Abimelech has never failed to tell me when I have annoyed him. I'm all foster. Uncle Abimelech doesn't like the Fosters, but I'm glad I take after them. If I had folded my hands and sat down meekly when Uncle Abimelech made known his goodwill and pleasure regarding Mary and me after Father's death, Mary would never have got to college. Nor I either, for that matter. Only I wouldn't have minded that very much. I just wanted to go to college because Mary did. I couldn't be separated from him. We were twins and had always been together. As for Uncle Abimelech's mind, I knew that he never had been known to change it. But as he himself was fond of saying, there has to be a first time for everything. And I had determined that this was to be the first time for him. I hadn't any idea how I was going to bring it about. But it just had to be done, and I'm not all foster for nothing. I knew I would have to depend on my own thinkers. Mary is clever at books and dissecting dead things, but he couldn't help me out in this. Even if he hadn't settled beforehand that there was no use in opposing Uncle Abimelech. I'm going to the garret to think this out, Mary, I said solemnly. Don't let anybody disturb me. And if Uncle Abimelech comes over, don't tell him where I am. If I don't come down in time to get tea, get it yourself. I shall not leave the garret until I have thought of some way to change Uncle Abimelech's mind. Then you'll be a prisoner there for the term of your natural life, dear sis, said Mary skeptically. You're a clever girl, Prue, and you've got enough decision for two. But you'll never get the better of Uncle Abimelech. We'll see, I said resolutely, and up to the garret I went. I shut the door and bolted it good and fastened to make sure. Then I piled some old cushions in the window seat, for one might as well be comfortable when one is thinking as not, and went over the whole ground from the beginning. Outside the window was threshing the broad, leafy top of the maple, whose tallest twigs reached to the funny grey eaves of our old house. One roly-poly little sparrow blew or flew to the sill and sat there for a minute, looking at me with knowing eyes. Down below I could see Murray in a corner of the yard, pottering over a sick duck. He had set his broken leg and was nursing it back to health. Anyone except Uncle Abimelech could see that Mary was simply born to be a doctor, and that it was flying in the face of Providence to think of making him anything else. From the garret windows I could see all over the farm, for the house is on the hill end of it. I could see all the dear old fields and the spring meadow and the beech woods in the southwest corner, and beyond the orchard were the 2 grey barns, and down below at the right-hand corner was the garden with all my sweet peas fluttering over the fences and trellises like a horde of butterflies. It was a dear old place, and both Mary and I loved every stick and stone on it. But there was no reason why we should go on living there when Mary didn't like farming. And it wasn't our own, anyhow. It all belonged to Uncle Abimelech. Father and Mary and I had always lived here together. Father's health broke down during his college course. That was one reason why Uncle Abimelech was set against Mary going to college, although Mary is as chubby and sturdy a fellow as you could wish it to see. Anybody with Foster in him would be that. To go back to Father, the doctors told him that his only chance of recovering his strength was an open-air life. So Father rented one of Uncle Abimelech's farms, and there he lived for the rest of his days. He did not get strong again until it was too late for college, and he was a square peg in a round hole all his life, as he used to tell us. Mother died before we could remember, so Mary and Dad and I were everything to each other. We were very happy too, although we were bossed by Uncle Abimelech more or less. But he meant it well, and Father didn't mind. Then Father died. Oh, that was a dreadful time. I hurried over it in my thinking out. Of course, when Mary and I came to look our position squarely in the face, we found that we were dependent on Uncle Abimelech for everything, even the roof over our heads. We were literally as poor as church mice, and even poorer, for at least they get churches rent-free. Mary's heart was set on going to college and study medicine. He asked Uncle Abimelech to lend him enough money to get a start with, and then he could work his own way along, pay back the loan in due time. Uncle Abimelech is rich, and Mary and I are his nearest relatives, but he simply wouldn't listen to Mary's plan. I put my foot firmly down on such nonsense, he said, and you know that when I put my foot down, something squashes. It was not that Uncle Abimelech was miserly, or that he grudged us assistance. Not at all. He was ready to deal generously by us. But it must be in his own way. His way was this. Mary and I were to stay on the farm, and when Mary was 21, Uncle Abimelech said he would deed the farm to him, make him a present of it, out and out. "It's a good farm, Mary," he said. "Your father never made more than a bare living out of it, because he wasn't strong enough to work it properly. That's what he got out of a college course, by the way. But you are strong enough and ambitious enough to do well." But Mary couldn't be a farmer. That was all there was to it. I told Uncle Abimelech so, firmly, and I talked to him for days about it. But Uncle Abimelech never wavered. He sat and listened to me with a quizzical smile on that handsome, clean-shaven, ruddy old face of his, with its cut granite features. And in the end he said, "You ought to be the one to go to college, if either of you did, Prue. You would make a capital lawyer, if I believe in the higher education of women, but I don't. Murray can take or leave the farm as he chooses. If he prefers the latter alternative, well and good, but he gets no help from me. You're a foolish little girl, Prue, to back him up in this nonsense of his. It makes me angry to be called a little girl. When I put up my hair a year ago, and Uncle Abimelech knows it. I gave up arguing with him. I knew it was no use anyway. I thought it all over in the garret, but no way out of the dilemma could I see. I had eaten up all the apples I had brought with me, and I felt flabby and disconsolate. The sight of Uncle Abimelech stalking up the lane, as erect and lordy as usual, served to deepen my gloom. I picked up the paper my apples had been wrapped in, and looked it over gloomily. Then I saw something, and Uncle Abimelech was delivered into my hand. The whole plan of campaign unrolled itself before me, and I fairly laughed in glee, looking out of the garret window right down on the little bald spot off the top of Uncle Abimelech's head, as he stood laying down the law to Mary about something. When Uncle Abimelech had gone, I went down to Mary. "Buddy," I said, "I've thought of a plan. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you are to consent to it without knowing. I think it will quench Uncle Abimelech, but you must have perfect confidence in me. You must back me up, no matter what I do, and let me have my own way in it all." "All right, sis," said Mary. "That isn't solemn enough," I protested. "I'm serious. Promise solemnly." "I promise solemnly, cross my heart," said Mary, looking like an owl. "Very well. Remember that your role is to lie low and say nothing, like Brer Rabbit. Aloe's anodyne limonette is pretty good stuff, isn't it, Mary? It cured your sprain after you had tried everything else, didn't it?" "Yes, but I don't see the connection." "It isn't necessary that you should. Well, what with your sprain and my rheumatics, I think I can manage it." "Look here, Prue. Are you sure that long brooding over your troubles up in the garret hasn't turned your brain?" "My brain is all right. Now leave me, minion. There is that which I would do." Mary grinned and went. I wrote a letter, took it down to the office, and mailed it. For a week there was nothing more to do. There is just one trait of Uncle Abimelech's disposition, more marked than his fondness for having his own way, and that one thing is family pride. The Melvilles are a very old family. The name dates back to the Norman conquest, when a certain Roger de Melville, who was an ancestor of ours, went over to England with William the Conqueror. I don't think the Melvilles ever did anything worth recording in history since. To be sure, as far back as we can trace, none of them has ever done anything bad either. They have been honest, respectable folks, and I think that is something worth being proud of. But Uncle Abimelech pinned his family pride to Roger de Melville. He had the Melville coat of arms and our family tree made out by an eminent genealogist, framed and hung up in his library, and he would not have done anything that would not have chimed in with that coat of arms and a conquering ancestor for the world. At the end of a week, I got an answer to my letter. It was what I wanted. I wrote again and sent a parcel. In 3 weeks' time, the storm burst. One day, I saw Uncle Abimelech striding up the lane. He had a big newspaper clutched in his hand. I turned to Murray, who was poring over a book of anatomy in the corner. "Mary, Uncle Abimelech is coming. There is going to be a battle royale between us. Allow me to remind you of your promise." "To lie low and say nothing? That's the cue, isn't it, sis?" "Unless Uncle Abimelech appeals to you. In that case, you are to back me up." Then Uncle Abimelech stalked in. He was purple with rage. Old Roger de Melville himself never could have looked fiercer. I did feel a Quaker too, but I faced Uncle Abimelech undauntedly. No use in having your name on the roll of Battle Abbey, if you can't stand your ground. Prudence, what does this mean? Thundered Uncle Abimelech as he flung the newspaper down on the table. Mary got up and peered over. Then he whistled. He started to say something, but remembered just in time and stopped. But he did give me a black look. Mary has a sneaking pride of name too, although he won't own up to it and laughs at Uncle Abimelech. I looked at the paper and began to laugh. We did look so funny, Mary and I, in that advertisement. It took up the whole page. At the top were our photos, half life-size, and underneath our names and addresses printed out in full. Below was the letter I had written to the Alloway Anodyne Limited folks. It was a florid testimonial to the virtues of their liniment. I said that it had cured Mary's brain after all other remedies had failed, and that, when I had been left a partial wreck from a very bad attack of rheumatic fever, the only thing that restored my joints and muscles to working order was Alloway's Anodyne Liniment, and so on. It was all true enough, although I dare say old Aunt Sarah from the Hollows Rubbing had as much to do with the cures as the liniment. But that is neither here nor there. What does this mean, Prudence? Said Uncle Abimelech again. He was quivering with wrath. But I was as cool as a cucumber, and Mary stood like a graven image. Why that, Uncle Abimelech? I said calmly. Well, it just means one of my ways of making money. That liniment company pays for those testimonials and photos. You know, they gave me $50 for the privilege of publishing them. $50 will pay for books and tuition for Mary and me at Canterville Academy next winter. And Mrs. Threadgold is kind enough to say she will board me for what help I can give her around the house, and wait for Mary's until he can earn it by teaching. I rattled all this off glibly before Uncle Abimelech could get in a word. It's disgraceful, he stormed. Disgraceful. Think of Sir Roger de Melville and a patent medicine advertisement. Mary Melville, what were you about, sir, to let your sister disgrace herself and her family name by such an outrageous transaction? I quaked a bit if Mary should fail me, but Mary was true blue. I gave Prue a free hand, sir. It's an honest business transaction enough, and the family name alone won't send us to college, you know, sir. Uncle Abimelech glared at us. This must be put an end to, he said. This advertisement must not appear again. I won't have it. But I've signed a contract that it is to run for 6 months, I said sturdily. And I've others in view. You remember the herb cure you recommended one spring, and that it did me so much good. I'm negotiating with the makers of that, and... The girl's mad, said Uncle Abimelech. Stark, staring mad. Oh, no, I'm not, Uncle Abimelech. I'm merely a pretty good businesswoman. You won't help Mary to go to college, so I must. This is the only way I have, and I'm going to see it through. After Uncle Abimelech had gone, still in a towering rage, Mary remonstrated. But I reminded him of his promise, and he had to succumb. Next day, Uncle Abimelech returned, a subdued and chastened Uncle Abimelech. See here, Prue, he said sternly, this thing must be stopped. I say it must. I'm not going to have the name of Melville dragged all over the country in a patent medicine advertisement. You've played your game and won it. take what comfort you can out of the confession. If you will agree to cancel this notorious contract of yours, I'll settle it with the company, and I'll put Mary through college, and you too, if you want to go. Something will have to be done with you, that's certain. Is this satisfactory?" "Perfectly," I said promptly. "If you will add thereto your promise that you will forget and forgive Uncle Abimelech, there are to be no hard feelings." Uncle Abimelech shrugged his shoulders. "In for a penny, in for a pound," he said. "Very well, Prue. We wipe off all scores and begin afresh. But there must be no more such doings. You've worked your little scheme through. Trust the foster for that. But in future, you've got to remember that in law you are Melville, whatever you are in fact." I nodded dutifully. "I'll remember, Uncle Abimelech," I promised. After everything had been arranged and Uncle Abimelech had gone, I looked at Mary. "Well?" I said. Mary twinkled. "You've accomplished the impossible, sis. But, as Uncle Abimelech intimated, don't you try it again." A Sandshore Wooing. Fir Cottage, Plover Sands, July 6th. We arrived here late last night, and all day Aunt Martha has kept her room to rest. So I had to keep mine also, although I felt as fresh as a morning lark, and just in the mood for enjoyment. My name is Marguerite Forrester, an absurdly long name for so small a girl. Aunt Martha always calls me Marguerite, with an accent of strong disapproval. She does not like my name, but she gives me the full benefit of it. Connie Shelmadine used to call me Rita. Connie was my roommate last year at the seminary. We correspond occasionally, but Aunt Martha frowns on it. I've always lived with Aunt Martha. My parents died when I was a baby. Aunt Martha says I'm to be her heiress if I please her. Which means, but you don't know what pleasing Aunt Martha means. Aunt is a determined and inveterate man-hater. She has no particular love for women indeed, and trusts nobody but Mrs. Saxby, her mate. I rather like Mrs. Saxby. She is not quite so far gone in petrifaction as Aunt, although she gets a little stonier every year. I expect the process will soon begin on me, but it hasn't yet. My flesh and blood are still unreasonably warm and pulsing and rebellious. Aunt Martha would be in danger of taking a fit if she ever saw me talking to a man. She watches me jealously, firmly determined to guard me from any possible attack of a roaring and ravening lion in the disguise of 19th century masculine attire. So I have to walk demurely and assume a virtue, if I have it not, while I pine after the untested fleshpots of Egypt in secret. We have come down to spend a few weeks at Fir Cottage. Our good landlady is a capacious, kindly-souled creature, and I think she has rather a liking for me. I have been chattering to her all day, for there are times when I absolutely must talk to somebody or go mad. July 10th. This sort of life is decidedly dull. The program of every day is the same. I go to the Sandshore with Aunt Martha and Mrs. Saxby in the morning, read to Aunt in the afternoons, and mope around by my disconsolate self in the evenings. Mrs. Blake has lent me, for shore use, a very fine spyglass which she owns. She says her man brought it home from foreign parts before he died. While Aunt and Mrs. Saxby meander up and down the shore, leaving me free to a certain extent, I amuse myself by examining distant seas and coasts through it, thus getting a few peeps into the forbidden world. We see a few people, although there is a large summer hotel about a mile up the beach. Our shore haunts do not seem to be popular with its guests. They prefer the rocks. This suits Aunt Martha admirably. I may also add that it doesn't suit her niece, but that is a matter of small importance. The first morning I noticed a white object on the rocks, about half a mile away, and turned my glass on it. There, apparently within a stone's throw of me, was a young man. He was lounging on a rock, looking dreamily out to sea. There was something about his face that reminded me of someone I know, but I cannot remember whom. Every morning he has reappeared on the same spot. He seems to be a solitary individual, given to prowling by himself. I wonder what Aunt would say if she knew what I am so earnestly watching through my glass at times. July 11th. I shall have to cease looking at the unknown, I'm afraid. This morning I turned my glass, as usual, on his pet haunt. I nearly fell over in my astonishment, for he was also looking through a spyglass straight at me too, it seemed. How foolish I felt, and yet my curiosity was so strong that a few minutes afterward I peeped back again, just to see what he was doing. Then he coolly laid down his glass, rose, lifted his cap, and bowed politely to me, or at least in my direction. I dropped my glass and smiled in a mixture of dismay and amusement. Then I remembered that he was probably watching me again, and might imagine my smile was meant for him. I banished it immediately, shut my glass up, and did not touch it again. Soon after, we came home. July 12th. Something has happened at last. Today I went to the shore as usual, fully resolved not even to glance in the forbidden direction. But in the end I had to take a peep, and saw him on the rocks with his glass leveled at me. When he saw that I was looking, he laid down the glass, held up his hands, and began to spell out something in the deaf-mute alphabet. Now, I know that same alphabet. Connie taught it to me last year, so that we might hold communication across the schoolroom. I gave one frantic glance at Aunt Martha's rigid back, and then watched him while he deftly spelled. I am Francis Shelmadine. Are you not Miss Forrester? My sister's friend. Francis Shelmadine. Now I knew whom he resembled. And have I not heard endless dissertations from Connie on this wonderful brother of hers? Francis the clever, the handsome, the charming, until he has become the only hero of dreams I have ever had. It was too wonderful. I could only stare dazedly back through my glass. May we know each other, he went on. May I come over and introduce myself? Right hand, yes. Left, no. I gasped. Suppose he were to come. What would happen? I raised my left hand sorrowfully. He looked quite crestfallen and disappointed as he spelled out, Why not? Would your friends disapprove? I signaled, Yes. Are you displeased at my boldness? Was his next question. Where had all Aunt Martha's precepts flown to then? I blushed to record that I lifted my left hand shyly, and had just time to catch his pleased expression when Aunt Martha came up and said it was time to go home. So I picked myself meekly up, shook the sand from my dress, and followed my good aunt dutifully home. July 13th. When we went to the shore this morning, I had to wait in spasms of remorse and anxiety until Aunt got tired of reading and set off along the shore with Mrs. Saxby. Then I reached for my glass. Mr. Shalmerdine and I had quite a conversation. Under the circumstances, there could be no useless circumlocution in our exchange of ideas. It was religiously boiled down, and ran something like this. "Are you not displeased with me?" "No, but I should be." "Why?" "It is wrong to deceive Aunt." "I am quite respectable." "That is not the question." "Can her prejudices be overcome?" "Absolutely no. Mrs. Allardyce, who is staying at the hotel, knows her well. Shall I bring her over to vouch for my character?" "It would not do a bit of good." "Then it is hopeless." "Yes." "Would you object to knowing me on your own account?" "No." "Do you ever come to the shore alone?" "No, Aunt would not permit me." "Must she know?" "Yes, I would not come without her permission." "You would not refuse to chat with me thus, now and then?" "I don't know. Perhaps not." I had to go home then. As we went, Mrs. Saxby complimented me on my good color. Aunt Martha looked her disapproval. If I were really ill, Aunt would spend her last cent in my behalf, but she would be just as well pleased to see me properly pale and subdued at all times, and not looking as if I were too well contented in this vale of tears. July 17th. I have talked a good deal with Mr. Shalmerdine these past 4 days. He is to be at the beach for some weeks longer. This morning he signaled across from the rocks. "I mean to see you at last. Tomorrow I will walk over and pass you." "You must not. Aunt will suspect." "No danger. Don't be alarmed. I will do nothing rash." I suppose he will. He seems to be very determined. Of course, I cannot prevent him from promenading on our beach all day if he chooses. But then if he did, Aunt would speedily leave him in sole possession of it. I wonder what I had better wear tomorrow. July 19th. Yesterday morning, Aunt Martha was serene and unsuspicious. It is dreadful of me to be deceiving her, and I do feel guilty. I sat down on the sand and pretended to read the Memoirs of a Missionary. Aunt likes cheery books like that, in an agony of anticipation. Presently Aunt said, majestically, "Marguerite, there is a man coming this way. We will move further down." And we moved. Poor Aunt. Mr. Shalmerdine came bravely on. I felt my heart beating to my very fingertips. He halted by the fragment of an old stranded boat. Aunt had turned her back on him. I ventured on a look. He lifted his hat with a twinkle in his eye. Just then Aunt said icily, "We will go home, Marguerite." That creature evidently intends to persist in his intrusion. Home we came accordingly. This morning he signaled across. "Letter from Connie. Message for you. I mean to deliver it personally. Do you ever go to church?" Now, I do go regularly to church at home. But Aunt Martha and Mrs. Saxby are both such rigid church people that they would not darken the doors of the Methodist Church at Plover Sands for any consideration. Needless to say, I am not allowed to go either. But it was impossible to make this long explanation, so I merely replied, "Not here." "Will you not go tomorrow morning?" "Aunt will not let me." "Coax her." "Coaxing never has any effect on her." Would you relent if Mrs. Allardyce were to call for you?" Now, I have been cautiously sounding Aunt about Mrs. Allardyce, and I have discovered that she disapproves of her. So I said, "It would be useless. I will ask Aunt if I may go, but I feel almost sure that she will not consent." This evening, when Aunt was in an unusually genial mood, I plucked up heart of grace and asked her. "Marguerite," she said impressively, "you know that I do not attend church here." "But Aunt," I persisted quakingly, "couldn't I go alone? It's not very far, and I will be very careful." Aunt merely gave me a look that said about 40 distinct and separate things, and I was turning away in despair when Mrs. Saxby, bless her heart, said, "I really think it would be no harm to let the child go." As Aunt attached great importance to Mrs. Saxby's opinion, she looked at me relentingly and said, "Well, I will think it over and let you know in the morning, Marguerite." Now, everything depends on the sort of humor Aunt is in the morning. July 20th. This morning was perfect, and after breakfast Aunt said, condescendingly, "I think you may attend church if you wish, Marguerite. Remember that I expect you to conduct yourself with becoming prudence and modesty." I flew upstairs and pulled my prettiest dress out of my trunk. It is a delicate, shimmering grey stuff with pearly tints about it. Every time I get anything new, Aunt Martha and I have a battle royale over it. I verily believe that Aunt would like me to dress in the fashions of Vogue in her youth. There is always a certain flavor of old-fashionedness about my gowns and hats. Connie used to say that it was delicious and gave me a piquant uniqueness, a certain unlikeness to other people that possessed a positive charm. That is only Connie's view of it, however. But I had had my own way about this dress, and it is really very becoming. I wore a little silver-grey chip hat, trimmed with pale pink flowers, and I pinned at my belt the sweetest cluster of old-fashioned blush rosebuds from the garden. Then I borrowed a hymn book from Mrs. Blake and ran down to undergo Aunt Martha's scrutiny. "Dear me, child," she said discontentedly, "you have gotten yourself up very frivolously, it seems to me." "Why, Auntie," I protested, "I am all in grey, every bit." Aunt Martha sniffed. You don't know how much Aunt can express in a sniff. But I tripped to church like a bird. The first person I saw there was Mr. Shalmerdine. He was sitting right across from me, and a smile glimmered in his eyes. I did not look at him again. Through the service, I was subdued enough to have satisfied even Aunt Martha. When church came out, he waited for me at the entrance to his pew. I pretended not to see him until he said "Good morning" in a voice vibrant and deep, which sounded as though it might become infinitely tender if its owner chose. When we went down the steps, he took my hymnal, and we walked up the long, bowery country roads. "Thank you so much for coming today," he said, as if I went to oblige him. "I had a hard time to get Aunt Martha's consent," I declared frankly. "I wouldn't have succeeded if Mrs. Saxby hadn't taken my part." "Heaven bless Mrs. Saxby," he remarked fervently. "But is there any known way of overcoming your aunt's scruples? If so, I am ready to risk it." "There is none. Aunt Martha is very good and kind to me, but she will never stop trying to bring me up. The process will be going on when I am 50. And she hates men. I don't know what she would do if she saw me now." Mr. Shalmerdine frowned and switched the unoffending daisies viciously with his cane. Then there is no hope of my seeing you openly and above board. Not at present, I said faintly. After a brief silence, we began to talk of other things. He told me how he happened to see me first. I was curious to know who the people were who were always in the same place at the same time. So one day I took my telescope. I could see you plainly. You were reading and had your hat off. When I went back to the hotel, I asked Mrs. Allardyce if she knew who the boarders at Fir Cottage were, and she told me. I had heard Connie speak of you, and I determined to make your acquaintance. When we reached the lane, I held out my hand for the hymnal. You mustn't come any further, Mr. Shelmardine, I said hurriedly. Aunt might see you. He took my hand and held it, looking at me seriously. Suppose I were to walk up to the cottage tomorrow and ask for you. I gasped. He looked so capable of doing anything he took it into his head to do. Oh, you wouldn't, I said piteously. Aunt Martha would. You are not in earnest. I suppose not, he said regretfully. Of course, I would not do anything that would cause you unpleasantness. But this must not, shall not, be our last meeting. Aunt will not let me come to church again, I said. Does she ever take a nap in the afternoon? He queried. I wriggled my parasol about in the dust uneasily. Sometimes. I shall be at the old boat tomorrow afternoon at 2:30, he said. I pulled my hand away. I couldn't, you know I couldn't, I cried, and then blushed to my ears. Are you sure you couldn't? Bending a little nearer. Quite sure, I murmured. He surrendered my hymnal at last. Will you give me a rose? I unpinned the whole cluster and handed it to him. He lifted it until it touched his lips. As for me, I scuttled up the lane in the most undignified fashion. At the turn, I looked back. He was still standing there with his hat off. July 24th. On Monday afternoon, I slipped away to the shore while Aunt Martha and Mrs. Saxby were taking their regular nap, and I was supposed to be reading sermons in my room. Mr. Shelmardine was leaning against the old boat, but he came swiftly across the sand to meet me. This is very kind of you, he said. I ought not to have come, I said repentantly. But it is so lonely there, and one can't be interested in sermons and memoirs all the time. Mr. Shelmardine laughed. Mr. and Mrs. Allardyce are on the other side of the boat. Will you come and meet them? How nice of him to bring them. I knew I should like Mrs. Allardyce just because Aunt Martha didn't. We had a delightful stroll. I never thought of the time until Mr. Shelmardine said it was 4 o'clock. Oh, is it so late as that? I cried. I must go at once. I'm sorry we have kept you so long, remarked Mr. Shelmardine in a tone of concern. If she should be awake, what will the consequences be? Too terrible to think of, I answered seriously. I'm sorry, Mr. Shelmardine, but you mustn't come any further. We will be here tomorrow afternoon, he said. Mr. Shelmardine, I protested. I wish you wouldn't put such ideas into my head. They won't come out. No, not if I read a whole volume of sermons right through. We looked at each other for a second. Then he began to smile, and we both went off into a peal of laughter. At least let me know if Mrs. Fisk rampages, he called after me as I fled. But Aunt Martha was not awake, and I have been to the shore 3 afternoons since then. I was there today, and I'm going tomorrow for a boat sail with Mr. Shelmardine Auntie Allardyce's. But I am afraid the former will do something rash soon. This afternoon, he said. I don't think I can stand this much longer. Stand what? I asked. You know very well, he answered recklessly. Meeting you in this clandestine manner, and thereby causing that poor conscience of yours such misery. If your aunt were not so unreasonable, I should never have stooped to it. It is all my fault, I said contritely. Well, I hardly meant that, he said grimly, but hadn't I better go frankly to your aunt and lay the whole case before her? You would never see me again if you did that, I said hastily, and then wished I hadn't. That is the worst threat you could make, he said. July 25th. It is all over, and I am the most miserable girl in the world. Of course, this means that Aunt Martha has discovered everything, and the deserved punishment of my sins has overtaken me. I slipped away again this afternoon and went for that boat sail. We had a lovely time, but were rather late getting in, and I hurried home with many misgivings. Aunt Martha met me at the door. My dress was draggled, my hat had slipped back, and the kinks and curls of my obstreperous hair were something awful. I know I looked very disreputable, and also, no doubt, very guilty and conscience-stricken. Aunt gave me an unutterable look, and then followed me up to my room in grim silence. Marguerite, what does this mean? I have lots of faults, but untruthfulness isn't one of them. I confessed everything, at least almost everything. I didn't tell about the telescopes and deaf-mute alphabet, and Aunt was too horror-stricken to think of asking how I first made Mr. Shelmardine's acquaintance. She listened in stony silence. I had expected a terrible scolding, but I suppose my crimes simply seemed to her too enormous for words. When I had sobbed out my last word, she rose, swept me one glance of withering contempt, and left the room. Presently Mrs. Saxby came up, looking concerned. My dear child, what have you been doing? Your aunt says that we are to go home on the afternoon train tomorrow. She is terribly upset. I just curled up on the bed and cried, while Mrs. Saxby packed my trunk. I will have no chance to explain matters to Mr. Shelmardine. And I will never see him again, for Aunt is quite capable of whisking me off to Africa. He will just think me a feather-brained flirt. Oh, I am so unhappy. July 26th. I am the happiest girl in the world. That is quite a different strain from yesterday. We leave for a cottage in an hour, but that doesn't matter now. I did not sleep a wink last night, and crawled miserably down to breakfast. Aunt took not the slightest notice of me, but to my surprise she told Mrs. Saxby that she intended taking a farewell walk to the shore. I knew I would be taken too, to be kept out of mischief, and my heart gave a great bound of hope. Perhaps I would have a chance to send word to Francis, since Aunt did not know of the part my spyglass had played in my bad behavior. I meekly followed my grim guardians to the shore and sat dejectedly on my rug, while they paced the sand. Francis was on the rocks. As soon as Aunt Martha and Mrs. Saxby were at a safe distance, I began my message. All discovered. Aunt is very angry. We go home today. Then I snatched my glass. His face expressed the direst consternation and dismay. He signaled, I must see you before you go. Impossible. Aunt will never forgive me. Goodbye. I saw a look of desperate determination cross his face. If 40 Aunt Marthas had swooped down upon me, I could not have torn my eyes from that glass. "I love you. You know it. Do you care for me?" I must have my answer now. What a situation. No time or chance for any maidenly hesitation or softening aureole of words. Aunt and Mrs. Saxby had almost reached the point where they invariably turned. I had barely time to spell out a plain, blunt yes, and read his answer. "I shall go home at once, get Mother, and Connie, follow you and demand possession of my property. I shall win the day. Have no fear. Till then, goodbye, my darling." "Marguerite," said Mrs. Saxby at my elbow, "it is time to go." I got up obediently. Aunt Martha was as grim, as uncompromising as ever, and Mrs. Saxby looked like a chief mourner. But do you suppose I cared? I dropped behind them just once before we left the shore. I knew he was watching me, and I waved my hand. I suppose I'm really engaged to Francis Shalmerdine. But was there ever such a funny wooing? And what will Aunt Martha say?